The colony ship Ardent Hope drifted through the Kepler expanse like a sleeping heartbeat. Slow, warm, full of life. It was not a military vessel. It carried no cannons, no rail drivers, no shielded battle plating along its hull. What it carried was far more precious, far more fragile. 431 children, ages 3 to 16, the sons and daughters of the Meridian Colony Project. Children who had never seen Earth, who had grown up between the stars, who knew the smell of recycled air as intimately as any prairie wind. They were being transferred to Helix Station, a grand academic hub at the edge of Dominion space, where they would receive the finest education in 7-star systems. Their parents had wept at the departure dock. Proud weeping, hopeful weeping, that was 6 days ago. On the bridge of the Ardent Hope, Captain Mara Solis reviewed the navigation logs for the 14th time that morning. Something had been bothering her since they crossed into the Velcathari corridor, a stretch of space technically classified as neutral territory, though everyone in the shipping lanes knew the Velcath considered it theirs by birthright. She'd filed the appropriate transit permits. She'd paid the corridor tax, 3 times the standard rate, as required for human vessels. She'd even transmitted the ceremonial greeting sequence that Velcath diplomacy demanded. 7 pulses of amber light, followed by complete radio silence for 60 seconds. She had done everything right, which was why the 3 Velcath warships appearing on her radar at 0413 hours felt like a thunderclap on a clear day. "They're not responding to hails," her comms officer, Lieutenant Davin Marsh, said. His voice was careful, controlled. "I've tried all 7 registered Velcath diplomatic frequencies. Try the emergency band." "Tried it, Captain. Nothing." Mara stared at the tactical display. 3 Velcath Spineclaw-class destroyers, each one 3 times the mass of the Ardent Hope, had arranged themselves in a triangular formation directly across their flight path. It was a blockade posture. It was also, she knew from her years in deep space transit, a hunting posture. "Wake the children's supervisors," she said quietly. "Tell them to keep everyone calm and in their quarters. Do not—" She paused, steadying her voice. "Do not tell the children anything yet." The next 40 minutes unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. The Velcath ship sent no warning, no ultimatum, no demand. They simply opened fire. Not at the hull, not at the engines. They fired with surgical, deliberate precision at the Ardent Hope's communications array first, shearing it clean off in a single blast that rocked the ship like a toy in a tide. Then the port thrusters, then the emergency beacon housing. One by one, every system that could call for help was targeted and destroyed with the kind of methodical patience that spoke not of battle rage, but of a plan long rehearsed. Mara had time to send one message. She screamed it into the emergency subspace burst, an old low-tech channel that didn't route through the primary array. It was slow, it was ugly. It would take hours to reach anyone, but it was all she had. "Ardent Hope to any vessel. We are under attack in the Velcathari corridor. Civilian ship, 431 children aboard. We are." The subspace transmitter went dark. What happened next aboard the Ardent Hope was recorded only by the ship's internal black box logs. Logs that would later be retrieved, reviewed, and entered into the permanent record of the Galactic Tribunal. Every sound, every scream, every desperate attempt by the crew to shield the children in the deepest compartments of the ship. It took the Velcath 47 minutes to finish. When their warships finally peeled away from the wreckage and vanished back into the dark, the Ardent Hope was no longer a ship. It was a cooling graveyard of bent metal and silence, tumbling slowly through the corridor like a broken toy discarded by a child too large for this galaxy. 431 children. None survived. Back on Helix Station, a supervisor named Councilwoman Preth Veldara of the Velcath delegation was drinking her morning tea when the news arrived. She read the preliminary report twice. Then she set down her cup very carefully, smoothed her robes, and sent a single-line encrypted message to the Velcath High Command. "Confirmed. The package has been delivered." She did not know, none of them knew, what had just been awakened. Because the subspace burst, moving at its slow, grinding speed through the dark, had already reached its first receiver. It had reached Fleet Admiral Jonas Kale, and Jonas Kale had children of his own. Fleet Admiral Jonas Kale, Received the subspace burst at 0611 hours aboard the UHNS Sovereign Wrath, the flagship of humanity's 7th Deep Space Fleet, currently on routine patrol near the Belthian Reach. He read it standing up. His communications officer, a young ensign named Reyes, had printed it on a physical slip of paper, old protocol for emergency subspace bursts, and handed it to the Admiral without a word. Reyes had read it first. He'd had to. Standard security procedure. And his hands, the Admiral noticed, were shaking. Cale read it. He read it again. He set it face down on the console. For exactly 12 seconds, Fleet Admiral Jonas Cale, 32-year veteran of the United Human Navy, survivor of the Battle of Drengar's Mouth, man who had once held a collapsing bulkhead shut with his bare hands for 4 minutes while his crew evacuated, said absolutely nothing. Then he picked up the fleet-wide command channel. "This is Admiral Cale. Full battle readiness. All ships. Right now." His second-in-command, Rear Admiral Una Park, was on the bridge in 90 seconds. She took one look at his face and didn't ask questions. She simply moved to her station and began issuing the orders that turned a fleet at rest into a fleet with a purpose. Kyle sent 3 messages before his ships even finished their readiness checks. The first went to Helix Station. Confirm status of Ardent Hope. All available data. Immediate priority. The second went to the United Human Embassy in Velkath Space. Do not issue any statements. Do not take any meetings. Stand by. The third went to Earth, to the Secretary General of the Human Collective, to the Joint Chiefs, to the full Security Council. It was 4 sentences long. The Velkath Dominion has attacked and destroyed the civilian colony vessel Ardent Hope in the Velkathari corridor. 431 human children are confirmed dead. No survivors. Awaiting your orders, but advise you give them quickly. The response from Earth took 11 minutes. When it came, it was not from the Secretary General. It was from President Alara Voss herself, the first human head of state to contact a field admiral directly since the Callisto crisis 30 years ago. Her message was 6 words. You have everything you need. Go. What followed in the next 18 hours was something that military historians would later describe with a single, haunting phrase. The quiet mobilization. There were no speeches on the news feeds, no dramatic press conferences, no grandstanding politicians standing before cameras with fire in their eyes. The human collective government went silent, deliberately, completely silent, and that silence was louder than any declaration of war. But the galaxy watched, and the galaxy saw what was moving. Every Velkath monitoring station in a 12-system radius began logging anomalies within the first 6 hours. Ship signatures, lots of them. Not the usual trickle of freighters and patrol vessels. These were warship signatures, the distinctive quantum fold distortion patterns of human military vessels jumping from their home systems in coordinated waves. The Velkath High Command received their first intelligence report at hour 7. Their chief military analyst, a 4-limbed strategist named Keth Voran, stared at the numbers for a long time before he spoke. That cannot be correct, he said. It is correct, High Commander, his aide replied. We have confirmed 67 human warships in transit toward our border. The count is still climbing. Keth Voran turned to the wall-sized star map behind him, where small red indicators were blinking into existence across the sector like stars being born. How many fleets does this represent? 3 confirmed fleets, High Commander, possibly 4. A pause. There are also reports of human vessels being recalled from the outer reaches in the Cygnus patrol line. They appear to be consolidating. For what purpose? Nobody answered, because nobody wanted to say what they were all thinking. On the wreckage recovery vessel Tenacious, Lieutenant Commander Faye Oduya led the team that reached the Ardent Hope at hour 14. She had volunteered for the assignment. She had not told anyone that she had a niece who had been aboard. Her team worked in silence. Recovery operations always had a kind of grim professionalism to them. The work of finding the dead was not performed with grief, because grief would make your hands shake and your vision blur, and you could not afford either when you were working in the debris field of a shattered ship. Grief came later in the dark, alone. But when Lieutenant Commander Oduya entered what remained of the Ardent Hope's primary shelter compartment, the deepest, most protected section of the ship, the one the crew had clearly tried to use as a final refuge. She stopped. The walls were covered in drawings. Children's drawings. Crayon and marker on the bare metal panels clearly made in those final terrible minutes when the crew had been trying to keep the children calm, when the adults had been running out of words and had handed the children drawing tools instead. Suns with faces, stick figure families, rockets, stars. A repeated motif that appeared in at least a dozen drawings, a blue-green planet with a ring of light around it. Earth, drawn by children who had never seen it, who only knew it from pictures and stories, who had drawn it in their last minutes alive because it was the most beautiful thing they could imagine. Faye Oduya stood there for a full minute. Then she took out her personal recorder and documented every single drawing, meticulously, one by one. Those images were transmitted to Fleet Admiral Kale with a single attached note. So you don't forget what you're doing this for. Kyle had them printed and pinned to the wall of his command center. He did not take them down. At hour 18, the Velkath Dominion's ambassador to the Galactic Accord, a senior diplomat named Velsor Kwan, formally requested an emergency closed session with the Accord's Peacekeeping Council. He was told the session had already been scheduled, by the humans. He was also told, politely but with no room for ambiguity, that the human delegation would not be presenting grievances. They would be presenting evidence. The Galactic Accord's Grand Chamber had hosted 47 emergency sessions in its 200-year history. Wars, plagues, the extinction event at Morvel 4, the Syndicate collapse. Its curved walls of pale stone had absorbed every kind of catastrophe the galaxy could produce. It had never seen anything quite like this. Every seat was filled. Species that hadn't sent delegations to the Accord in decades had dispatched representatives overnight. The Velkath delegation sat in their designated arc of seats, all 11 of them, and if they had been capable of sweating, they would have been. Ambassador Velsor Kwan had prepared a defense. A careful, layered, legally intricate defense built on 3 pillars: the Ardent Hope's alleged failure to properly file corridor transit papers, a disputed interpretation of the Velkathari sovereignty agreement, and a suggestion, carefully worded, never quite stated outright, that the humans had been running some kind of intelligence operation using the children's vessel as cover. He never got to deliver it, because when the human delegation entered the chamber, they were led not by a diplomat. They were led by Fleet Admiral Jonas Kyle. He wore his dress uniform, every medal, every decoration. 32 years of service arranged across his chest in neat rows. He walked to the human delegation's podium and placed his hands on it and looked out at the chamber. And the chamber went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something large and patient has entered them. He did not begin with legal arguments. He pressed a button. The chamber's central holographic display, a massive sphere of light designed to show star maps and tactical displays, filled instead with a single image, the crayon drawings from the shelter compartment of the Ardent Hope. He had arranged them in a grid, all of them. Every Earth with its ring of light, every smiling sun, every stick figure family, every rocket ship with a child's name written on the side in a child's careful, imperfect handwriting. He let the chamber look at them for 60 seconds. Then he spoke. Their names, he said, were on the manifest. He touched the podium again and the drawings were replaced by a list, a long scrolling list of names, ages, and home colonies. I'm going to read them. The Velkath ambassador began to rise. Admiral, this is highly irregular. The Accord's proceedings require— Sit down, said 12 different species representatives, simultaneously. Velsor Kwan sat down. Jonas Kale began to read. It took 19 minutes, 431 names, ages, where they were born, what they liked, because Kale's team had contacted every family, and the families had sent him things. A note that said Liam loved drawing starships and wanted to be an engineer. A note that said Priya was afraid of the dark and always slept with her light on. A note that said Tomas was 6 years old, and his favorite word was why, and he asked it about everything, all the time, every single day. By the time Admiral Kale reached the 215th name, 3 non-human delegates were visibly distressed. By the 350th, the chamber was the quietest it had ever been in 200 years. At 431 he stopped. He looked up from the list. I have documentation, he said in the same quiet, steady voice. That proves the Velkath High Command ordered this attack. I have the encrypted message sent by Councilwoman Preth Veldara, confirming the attack was deliberate, planned, and sanctioned at the highest levels of the Velkath government. He paused. I also have 73 warships positioned at the boundary of Velkath space. The chamber erupted. Multiple delegations speaking at once. The Accord's chief arbiter hammering for order. The Velkath ambassador on his feet, shouting denials. But they were the wrong kind of denials. Too fast and too loud. The denials of a man who already knows the evidence exists and is hoping volume will serve where logic cannot. It took 4 minutes for the chamber to settle. When it did, it was because a delegation that almost never spoke had asked for the floor. The Mirathi Collective, the oldest spacefaring civilization in the Accord, a species so ancient that 3 of the galaxy's current starfaring cultures were descended from their early colonies, had not issued a formal statement in 60 years. Their representative, an elder called Sev Amarant, moved to the central speaking position with the slow, deliberate care of extreme age. When Sev Amarant spoke, every other voice in the galaxy, it sometimes seemed, stopped to listen. We have reviewed the Admiral's evidence, the elder said. The Mirathi's translator rendered their voice as something low and resonant, like sound traveling through deep water. It is complete. It is unambiguous. The Velkath Dominion ordered the deliberate murder of 431 non-combatant human children in neutral space. A pause of exactly 3 seconds. The Mirathi Collective formally recognizes humanity's right of full military response. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. It was the silence of a door closing that will not open again. In the Velkath Dominion's capital, the High Command had been watching the Accord session on secure feed. When Sev Amarant finished speaking, High Commander Keth Varan turned away from the display and looked at his senior staff. How many human ships are now confirmed at our border? He asked. His intelligence chief answered without looking up from his console. The answer was the same as the last answer, but larger now. Much larger. 91 warships, High Commander. 3 full carrier groups. Admiral Kale has also been joined by vessels from 6 allied human colony systems. A pause. And the Brithani Trade Federation has recalled its own ships from Velkath space. The Brithani? Keth Varan's voice was very quiet. Yes, sir. They cited moral objection to continued presence in Velkath territory. Similar notices have been filed by the Tesseri Cooperative and the Lundara Compact. Keth Varan understood what that meant. It wasn't just warships gathering at his border. It was the galaxy turning its back. One by one, the trade routes closing. The diplomatic channels going cold. The slowly, methodically, inexorably tightening isolation of a civilization that had made a catastrophic mistake, and was only now beginning to understand the true dimensions of what it had done. He had thought humans were like every other species, capable of being pushed, of being provoked, of having lines crossed, and then, eventually, of being managed back down. Every species could be negotiated with, delayed, redirected. Patience and politics, in Keth Varan's long experience, could outlast almost any anger. He was learning something now that he should have known before he ordered those warships into the corridor. Human grief was not a fire that burned and faded. It was a forge. The formal ultimatum was delivered at hour 71. Not by a diplomat, not through the Accord's channels. It was transmitted directly to the Velkath High Command on a military frequency by Fleet Admiral Jonas Kale from the bridge of the UHNS Sovereign Wrath, which was now positioned 14,000 kilometers from the Velkath Dominion's primary border station. It was 11 sentences long. It demanded the immediate surrender of every individual in the chain of command that had ordered and executed the attack on the Ardent Hope. It demanded full reparations to the families of every child killed. It demanded the permanent dissolution of the Velkathari Corridor sovereignty claim and its cession to the Galactic Accord as neutral administered territory. It demanded a formal public apology broadcast on every Velkath communications channel for no fewer than 30 consecutive days. And it gave the Velkath High Command 1 hour to comply. Or what? High Commander Keth Varan had reportedly asked when the message finished playing. His intelligence chief had pulled up the latest sensor data and put it on screen without a word. 91 warships, 3 carrier groups, alongside them now, and this was the part that had begun keeping the entire High Command awake at night. A growing convoy of civilian vessels. Not military, not combat ships, transports, habitat modules, construction barges. The kind of fleet you built not to fight over a territory but to move into it. The humans weren't just coming to destroy. They were coming to stay. And that, somehow in a way that military might alone could never have communicated, was the thing that finally broke the High Command's certainty. You could rebuild from a defeat. You could regroup, rearm, reclaim. History was full of defeated empires that had risen again, but you could not reclaim land that was already occupied, already settled, already lived in by a species that had 431 reasons to make absolutely certain it would never, ever be moved. The emergency session of the Velkath High Command lasted 6 minutes. The formal request for negotiated surrender was transmitted at hour 71 minutes and 58 seconds. It arrived with 2 seconds to spare. Councilwoman Preth Veldara was arrested by Accord peacekeeping officers 4 hours later, along with 14 members of the Velkath military command structure. The evidence Admiral Kale had presented left no room for interpretation, and the Accord, for the first time in its history, voted unanimously to authorize extradition. The vote was 219-0. The Velkath delegation abstained. It was the closest thing to a confession the chamber had ever seen. Feoduya was not on the sovereign wrath when the surrender came through. She was still on the tenacious, finishing the recovery operation on the Ardent Hope. There was still work to do, careful, quiet, necessary work. She was still in the shelter compartment when her comms unit buzzed with the news. She read it. She sat with it for a moment. Then she looked up at the wall of drawings around her, the blue-green earth with its rings of light drawn over and over again by 431 children, who had never seen it, who had only ever known the space between stars. She thought about what it meant that those drawings existed, that in the last minutes, surrounded by darkness and fear, and the sounds of their world ending, children had reached for crayons and drawn the most beautiful thing they knew. She thought that maybe that was the most human thing of all. Not the warships, not the ultimatum, not the 91-ship fleet that had made an empire flinch. The drawing, the refusal to stop imagining something beautiful. She pressed her fingertips lightly to the wall, not touching the drawings, just near them, the way you stand near something precious without presuming to hold it. "We came back for you," she said quietly. "All of you. We came back." The Ardent Hope's black box recorder was recovered, and its contents entered into the permanent historical record of the Galactic Accord. The children's drawings were digitally preserved and transmitted to every species in the Accord, a gesture that Kale had authorized personally, over the objections of several of his own staff who felt it was manipulative. "Good," he'd said. "Let them be moved." The Velkathari corridor was ceded to Accord administration within 90 days. A permanent memorial beacon was placed at the coordinates where the Ardent Hope had been destroyed, a simple light, white and steady, visible on long-range sensors for 11 light-years in every direction. Its official designation in the Accord's navigation registry was clinical, bureaucratic, and easy to miss if you weren't looking. But every human pilot in the deep lanes knew what it meant. They had a different name for it. They called it the Children's Lamp. And for a generation of Velkath navigators, it became the single most carefully avoided set of coordinates in their star charts, not because of any law or treaty, but because of something simpler and older and far more durable than either. Because when you pass a light that marks the place where 431 children drew pictures of Earth in their final minutes, you feel it. Whatever you are, whatever you have done, however many light years of cold space separate you from the concept of conscience, you feel it, and you go around,